Well, I guess for me, what really interests me is how do we think of learning capability at multiple levels of scale, right? And so, you, when you talk about learning capability at the level of a whole profession that has, like, I don't know, millions of people probably, you're talking about a really high level of scale, and you need to make sure that you kind of cross multiple levels of scale, so that you don't assume, for instance, that people are going to identify with at the level of engagement in practice with a community of 3 million people. So you may actually think of how people invest their identity. Like, for instance, they identify as a teacher or they identify as a science teacher, right? And then you have to think, okay, what kind of places of engagement would be valuable that may be different from the level at which they place their identity. So, okay, I'm a teacher, but in practice, it's useful for me to interact with these kind of teachers or with people here or with people who are not teachers. You know what I mean? So I think what the web has done, to me, mostly, is to start giving me ways to think about different levels of connectivity. So you are thinking of doing sort of this very general portal, right? Mm-hmm. But this very general portal assumes a kind of identity that's very, very high level, right? I'm a teacher, okay, so this is a portal for me. What we find, for instance, with the web, is that you have those different levels coexisting. So you have a very general portal for teachers, but then you have someone who creates an aggregation for a very specific type of person who, at this stage in their life, would like to connect in that way. You see what I mean? And so I think that there was a little bit, during our conversation, a kind of tension between sort of like the one-stop shop for everybody and the kind of allowing the diversity of different ways of being in the world. And I think when we start thinking about learning capability as an attribute of a social system, we need to start thinking about how those different places allow people to be who they are in different ways, or to become what they're becoming in different ways. And to think of that as happening at multiple levels of scale geographically and in terms of domains, So there is a science teacher, there is a third grade science teacher, or there is a science teacher in an urban setting. See what I mean? So there are all these ways that identity and learning are interrelated.
So I guess the other value in play Department of Education holds very heavily is efficiency. Let's avoid duplication. Let's avoid redundancy, and so there seems to be a tension between wanting to value all of these different facets of identity and how people connect around them, and also wanting to try to avoid a kind of fragmentation where there's the same thing happening in 14 different places. And so,
True.
What do you do?
Well,
about
but
that?
I think the problem we have, perhaps because we come out of an industrial phase, is that we think that efficiency and standardization are the same thing. And I don't think we should assume that standardization and efficiency are the same thing, right? So when you have multiple places that can be very specialized to a certain kind of engagement or a certain kind of identity, you have a kind of efficiency. You see what I mean? Like if you belong to a committee of practice that's very focused, you have a kind of efficiency because you kind of know that what's going to happen there is likely to be relevant to you. That's a kind of efficiency. But that also means there are all sorts of little communities doing all sorts of different things. They are efficient locally, but they may not be efficient necessarily at a different level of scale, right? But if you want to move efficiency at a higher level of scale, I think you have to respect that there has to be efficiency at the other levels of scale too. So, you see what I mean? But if you try to standardize and gain efficiency by uniformity, then you lose efficiency at other levels of scale. So what I'm saying is that we start to think about learning capability as happening at the same time at multiple levels of scale. And so going to scale is not going from the local to the global, but it's sustaining all these levels of skills existing at the same
and
time.
articulating.
Yeah. And paying attention, paying attention to the places that allow articulation between them. Yeah.